2 minutos. Someone needs to help to move them, otherwise it takes
Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. With regard to the Guayaquil statement and the review made just now, as CEPRE de LAC, we are also endorsing this document within the framework, as was already explained by Don Ricardo Melna. It's a non-binding document to be reviewed, and it's an orienting framework for all the delegations for each one of the countries, where each country has its final word. And this will be just as a roadmap for orienting the direction, and to be able to arrive at March 2015 in Japan with a proposal that is consolidated. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good example of being brief and to the point.
un representante de los municipalidades.
A representative from the municipalities and local governments, Mr. Jose Manuel Corral. He represents the city of Santa Fe in Argentina. But here he is now representing all of the local governments. Good afternoon. Thank you. He has given me some minutes. The authorities of the local governments come to ratify the guidelines of our framework for action of Hyogo in the global platform for 2015, and we feel we are represented by the communique, the statement of Guayaquil that has just been adopted. We are convinced that the climate change, in addition, gives us challenges that are greater than the ones we already had for mankind, and that's why we are in favor of thematic agendas and efforts and everything regarding sustainable development, climate change, urban planning and territorial planning, and risk management, disaster risk management. Resilience must be understood as a factor for development, not just mitigation of risk. A development based on equity, because those who are more vulnerable, the weakest ones, are the neediest. They are the ones that are most exposed to risks, and they're the most vulnerable. The worst part is always suffered by those who have the least. In the most unprotected areas, disasters are greater impact. Have a greater impact in areas where the recovery is even harder, and therefore we need policies for local social inclusion. Increasingly, mankind is going to live in cities because of the double phenomenon of the increase of world population and in globalization circumstances. We believe that the next decades the cities will grow significantly, and depending on how this development is deployed, the known disasters may actually increase or reduce. That's why we are convinced that we should localize the disaster risk management, because it's in the level of territories with their governments, their communities, and their authorities where we can define these topics. We consider, therefore, indispensable to have hierarchization of the voices of the local governments as agents for constructing resilience and as promoters of a sustainable development with equity. And we believe that this is one of the chapters that the Hyogo framework post-2015 must incorporate explicitly. Resilience is constructed from down up. And we are the civil society and its members that are faced with these challenges, and we need to incorporate these capacities to reduce the disaster risk. In this regard, we can have advances and concrete accomplishments that tell us what else the road that lies ahead. In this regard, the relevance of the World Campaign to Develop Resilient Cities is important, and the Office of the United Nations for the Disaster Risk Reduction is in place as a very specific tool to promote essential aspects of within the Hyogo framework. We would like to promote from the local governments that we use mechanisms that are specifically going to use the local governments. It's not just a political determination, but it is also important to have tools and concrete programs for orienting, training, and strengthening the local capacities and governance. So much so that the organizations are referring to them as national and subnational organizations in each country. We are all, the local governments, we're active part of this process, and we want to be recognized as protagonists. And we have responsibilities, competencies, and specific powers and authorities. And we have the day-to-day work with our communities, and we believe it is necessary to also acknowledge the civil society and the private sector, all of whom are essential actors for building resilience, which needs to be based on participation and real involvement of the cities, of the citizens. We all have responsibilities, and we're all accountable. And disasters are not limited by borders or frontiers or administrative duties. That's why we're committed to increase cities, networks, associations, and communities, so that in every territory, all efforts are joined to generate a sustainable development based on the risk management and adaptation to climate change. Into this, we also need the support of the higher structures, both subnational as well as national, looking to join efforts and resources. Finally, we'd like to highlight that I'll leave on for the record that with the cooperation with the representatives of Bogota and many other cities, we have drafted a voluntary commitment letter that all of us offer to assume in order to develop sustainable development based on equity, resilience, and disaster risk management as specific indicators that will allow us to measure the concrete results of these actions and progress made in this regard. And now we leave this commitment to Ms. Wallström.
Muchas gracias por esta declaración.
Thank you very much for this statement of a commitment by the governments, the municipal governments, and there are some more places on this side if you are looking for a place. And I invite Mr. Roberto Leon, who represents the group of parliamentaries that have worked here for several days. Good afternoon. In order, we fully share the declarations, and in the interest of time, I want to say that number 3 was especially good, 18 and 38 as well. I look like a pastor quoting the Bible paragraphs, but versicles, but I'm saying this just because of the following. Number 3 is saying something that I realized that when I was here only 2 days in this conference. And you have 4 conferences already. We're looking for agreements. But nature continues to do its work. A lot has been written, and I think it's impossible to write anything else, and the damage continues to increase. So I believe this needs to take us necessarily to ask, what is happening? What's going on? Why don't we have a harmony? Why aren't we harmonious between theory and what practical practices, between harmony and theory and practice? If in our countries, if we really put into practice in our respective countries what we're saying in theory, then in 10 years we would be just fine at least. The damage should have maintained or even decreased, but that hasn't happened. Therefore, there is a task that we need to see that it has to do with what is mentioned in number 18, paragraph 18, which is citizen participation and community participation. Undoubtedly, we have to do a lot of work in that area, and that's the key. Parliamentary participation is fundamental in this regard, because one hears what's going on. And yesterday, several people mentioned the lack of political will. And I share that opinion. And the lack of resources, and I hear that, yeah, and yes, we do share that same opinion. So I think it's important to understand that we need to be capable of saying to our respective governments, look, unless you invest on this, you're going to spend all this. And that means it's not just a theory. I heard one of the representatives from Ecuador who was saying that they're already beginning and they're preparing for the Nino current, and it's true. My dear Margareta, that's a more practical thing. We're also going to be here in Chile, and let me tell you, here in Chile we either have the Niña or the Niño, and when we're resting, we'll have the tsunamis and the earthquakes. So the concrete thing is that we've got to be capable of saying between the Nino phenomenon, the last one we had, and the next one that we will be suffering or hit by, what are we to correct? What are we supposed to correct? We know that if my province, which is a farming province, I know which rivers are going to flood. And the question is, what are we going to do? And I'm sure that happens everywhere. It's not just in my country. All those who are going to be affected. So in that regard, we need to have solution proposals that are more practical. And whenever the time comes, the moment comes that we can be capable of saying, okay, this between this event and this other event, we have made great progress. And as Chile, we knew how to grow and how to progress. The earthquake, the 2010 earthquake and tsunami showed us naked vis-a-vis the international community. 4 years later, in 24 hours, we had two earthquakes, over 8 on the Richter scale. And INEMI, which is directed by Ricardo Toro, operated really well, and we're very proud of that performance. But I think we still have a long ways to go with a policy that goes beyond all that. And I think that we need to strengthen your office to be able to forge ahead in these lines. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Ahora invito a un representante de la Federación Internacional de la Cruz Roja, el señor Xavier Castellanos.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Señora ministra, no puedo empezar sin reconocer su liderazgo, el liderazgo de su equipo por este extraordinario evento y la calidad de hospitalidad que hemos tenido aquí en Guayaquil, Ecuador.
That we've had here in Guayaquil, Ecuador. I would be remiss if I do not mention Margareta's leadership for the disaster risk management and reduction, and Ricardo's leadership where he and his team have deployed a fantastic work in this dialogue and with all the stakeholders and humanitarian stakeholders and governments of the civil society and governments, etc. For the Crescent and the International Red Cross organizations, to all of us, the statement of Guayaquil reflects the spirit and the responsibility that our organization does have and promotes, with over 5,000 local Red Cross offices in the Americas, and which is always closed permanently next to communities at all times. And therefore, the Federation is very pleased to join this initiative. Thank you. Thank you very much.